Hi, this is Brad Sandler with Real Progressives, and I'm here today with Dr. Jill Stein, and we're going to talk a little bit about the presidential campaigns and other things pertaining to the Green Party. Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Great to be here.
Yes, welcome to Salem. I'm a resident.
Oh, you are?
Yes, yeah.
Wonderful.
Is this your first trip?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, wonderful place. I love it.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
I'm not native to here, but
Oh, really?
I've made it home. Anyways, personal note. I have never spoken to, in person, a presidential candidate, let alone one I had voted for. So this is kind of like a really neat moment for myself, having to meet somebody that I have voted for.
Well, I was working for you,
Thank
so
you.
here we are as a team,
Yes.
and the work goes on.
Right. So tell me, give me a little bit of background of the 2016. We'll skip 2008, 2012.
Uh-huh.
Yes, I voted in that too.
Sure.
And what did you learn? What was your takeaways?
Speak up. For me, 2016 really confirmed that there is a rebellion in full swing right now in the United States of America, that people are hurting badly and are really tired of being thrown under the bus on jobs, wages, health care, education, school debt, the climate, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we can afford to buy. And people are really hungry for change. We know this by statistics. The largest block of voters were people who didn't vote for the two parties being rammed down their throats at all. 100 million voters.
Yes.
It's like practically the size of the other, Democrats and Republicans put together. And these are disproportionately black, brown, millennial, and low-income people who are most being thrown under the bus. And people can't wait. They absolutely can't wait. And now we know that, the climate can't wait, healthcare can't wait, the economy is teetering at the brink, and, international peace and security is going down in flames right now. So I think what we learned in 2016, confirms that people are ready to break out. The other thing I really learned was that when you threaten the system, and I always knew this, but I had never experienced it with this much intensity, because we've never gotten, as much, just visibility. And people were really hungry for what we were about, especially after Bernie was sabotaged by the Democratic establishment. So it's really clear that the system pushed back. It's still pushing back, and it continued to vilify and attack us as Greens, which it's continuing to do. But now that Bernie's back in the race, they're attacking him, they're attacking Tulsi Gabbard, they're attacking the progressives right now. So it's kind of taken the heat off of us, finally after about 3 years.
So you look at this as an opportunity.
Oh, I think, it's a necessity and an opportunity,
Yes.
both, and a crisis, all rolled into one. And it really compels us to just double down on our game here, because people really need, we are still the ones we've been waiting for.
True. And that's a wonderful way to look at it. Moving past that and talking about current policy and things like that, Medicare for all. How important is it, and what will that matter? How will that change America?
America, is really hurting. America is sick. Our vital statistics, our longevity, our health, our afflictions with epidemics of chronic disease, they are going through the roof right now, as they have been, but it's accelerating. And, I think we are the only developed country where our health status is actually declining, and this is very much linked to our economic hardships too, that as as the economy throws people under the bus, they're hurting. You know, we see this rise in epidemics of despair and self-destruction and alcohol and drugs and opioids and suicide and guns and conflict. And, you know, we need a healthcare system that takes care of us rather than just generating profit as its first priority. And, you know, that's sort of a metaphor for the larger society as well. People are being exploited right now, you know, for corporate profit, and we're being thrown to the dogs in all kinds of ways. So we need Medicare for all. Healthcare is critically important. You know, we know that there are tens of thousands of needless deaths every year for lack of it. We know that it saves us money in the long run. It doesn't cost us. You know, and we also need to stop inflicting illness on people. Our broader society and corporations and the degradation of our food and our water and our air is making people sick too. So we gotta deal with it at both ends. We need a real healthcare system that's caring for us and for everyone and not primarily generating profits. And you know, and we need to establish the foundations of health, which are not so hard, and they pay for themselves many times over.
True. What you're describing is a total systemic alteration of the whole American mechanism, how we do things, the processes, the way everything is done. And the general approach, there's a couple of exceptions, from the Democrats is supposedly being progressive, at least the media tells us they are, is more of a piecemeal approach very frequently. How do you communicate to the establishment of Democrats why a larger policy is needed to actually make what they want, claim they want, a reality, and why do they have to realize that there's an economic component to everything that makes this all really integrated with everything that goes on?
It's, you know, there's this saying that goes to the effect, it's hard to teach a man something when his income depends on not knowing it. So, you know, it's very hard to change the direction of people of privilege. And on the other hand, people who are hurting, who are being thrown under the bus, which is most Americans, you know, who are either poor, low income, or downwardly mobile right now, including a generation of young people, 45 million, you know, Gen Xers, Gen Zs, millennials, and so on. You know, they're really hurting and don't have much future economic prospects. In my experience, you don't have to change their minds. All you have to do is that media is sold out and effectively shut down as a foundation of democracy. You know, so it's not straightforward. You know, and it's so important that we have independent media like Real Progressives that's out there. You know, doing real media. You know, we call it like the real press as opposed to what I call the O-press and the repress and the depress. You know, the press that's there to basically just defend the, you know, the status quo. It's really important that we get the word out. In my experience, that's the key thing. And remember, that is the biggest block of voters right there. And you know, it's in my experience, it's as easy as just establishing that conversation. That's not straightforward because it's hard to communicate with people when you don't have gobs of corporate money and when the media is really quite sold out, shut down. And so it's about organizing, fundamentally. This is about organizing.
Your comments bring to mind the push right now against social media by legislative powers saying we need laws controlling how and what is said on social media. And do you see that as part of the neoliberal establishment trying to suppress change?
Absolutely, yes. And you know, it's social media, it's also legacy media, it's whistleblowers, in many ways, democracy and our right to a free press and to the right to protest and the right to political dissent, it's all very much under attack. We've seen the algorithms by which Google does its searches, rearranged to suppress the peace movement, social movement. This is what Russiagate has been about very much, is declaring dissidents, declaring the social movement to be tools of a foreign power. I mean, this is classic McCarthyism, all over again. And yes, this is the sign, in my view, of an empire that's running scared right now. An empire which is doubling down with wars abroad is also doubling down with an attack on democracy at home. And it's not only the assault on social media, on freedom of the press, on whistleblowers. The press is silent about Chelsea Manning and the just horrific abuse of Manning, which is taking place now. She's being fined $1,000 a day for refusing to collaborate with this grand jury investigation. This is clearly, cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, this is outrageous. It's unheard of. The press should be screaming about this because fundamentally, Julian Assange, yes, they are next. That's right. And if they're not going to stand up for our right to free press, for the right of publishers to actually publish material of critical interest to the public in order to hold our elected officials accountable for their, war crimes, for their human rights abuses, for torture, for lying in our name. If we cannot hold our power holders accountable through the press, we've got a very difficult situation for democracy and for containing empire. So I would say shame on the press, shame on the press for abandoning its cause. The press has really become lapdogs to power, and they're not only useless. I'd say they're downright destructive to our democracy. And let's hope they see the light or get stopped. And that this incredible consolidation of corporate power into fewer and fewer hands in the media, needs to be reversed. And we need to be, all of us, supporting independent and progressive media so that we actually have, this fundamental foundation of democracy.
And one last question, and I think Kathy may come up with one afterwards. Want to know, Real Progressives works around the lens of modern monetary theory. We use that to examine policy, figure out ways to actually pay for things, burnt into what modern monetary theory is. What's your view of how that plays into Green Party positions on economics?
I think it's really important. In 2016, we had proposed one of the ways to abolish student debt was, fundamentally by creating the money to do that
and
as a legitimate exercise of the congressional right.
Yes.
I almost threw something at the TV when John Oliver reviewed that.
No, that was so ridiculous. And where is he now that, that many of the progressive Democrats are following in our footsteps, So I think it's really important. I did discover what a complicated discussion it is. There's this rule of thumb about when you're campaigning that goes something like, if you're educating, you're losing, if you're having to explain things to people as you go, very hard to do that. So, it was just one of the lessons learned, but it's really important that we challenge the so-called conventional wisdom of, about money and debt and, the creation of money and all that. It's really important for kind of liberating our power as a democracy, to exercise that democracy in our, in our agenda and the financing of that agenda.
Okay. Kathy?
Hi, and I'm not going to come in front of the camera, I don't need to.
All right.
I have just, this is very personal to me. I've been asking Greens, and I've been asking my progressive Democrat friends, and even some Republicans that are following the fellow in Texas that greened his entire town, and then a Democrat next door greened his as well. And I'm wondering if you ever see that there may be some sort of symposium, and it doesn't even have to be a media fest, but a gathering of Greens and eco-socialists and progressive Democrats, progressives, Republicans, to work on the Green New Deal, because we have about 30, 40 years of good ideas, in my opinion, being held up by political affinity rather than taking the best ideas and synthesizing them and bringing us something we can use and mighty quick. So how do you feel do you think that would ever have a snowball's chance in Hades of happening?
I think the more dialogue, the better. And whether it's a conference or it's just, broader and more diverse communications, there are many ways to approach this. And one of the reasons that I think ranked choice voting is so critically important is that it allows people to collaborate across party lines. And it kind of puts an end to the fear-mongering and the blame shame game, which is to say, oh, we can't hear from those third parties because they're going to destroy our election. Well, actually, let's just fix the elections instead of silencing the democratic process, which really requires that there be multiple voices, and you need to be challenging power and so on. So I think ranked choice voting, like the state of Maine has enacted, and Massachusetts is about to run a referendum in 2020. We're going to vote on a major referendum. We're in the process of starting to get that on the ballot right now, so that we too can enact ranked choice voting. So we don't have to obsess about the party label. We can get, not that the party label isn't important. I do think it's important. There are realities that come with it, but that can't stand in the way. We can't allow a debate about strategy to silence everything else, like a discussion about the climate crisis and how we could actually fix it right now. And I think there's lots of room for collaboration across party lines. And I really encourage people to tune into ranked choice voting as a fix. It's kind of an overarching fix that reestablishes debate and dialogue, which is essential for democracy and for real elections.
I haven't really studied it enough to agree or disagree with you. It sounds like a good idea, and I'll be reading more.
If you're around tomorrow, our closing session at the plenary is actually, I'm going to be joined by the campaign manager for the Maine Miracle, where they climbed mountains. It was just incredible, the resistance that you get from Democrats and Republicans. They want to shut this conversation down. They don't want to open it up.
Right.
So the legislatures typically fight this. And in Maine, they had to pass it once by voter referendum. The legislature killed it. And then they held a second referendum to basically exercise the people's veto, which is something that you can do in Maine, which is kind of cool. By referendum, you can undo what the legislature has done. So they did amazing things. So
Yeah.
The architect of that success is actually coming tomorrow, so we can advise Greens to, how we can go home and make this happen in all of our states, so that we can really liberate our votes, so that our values can guide our votes. Right now, you're supposed to go to the polls and roll the dice and read the polls. You're supposed to go to the voting booth and you read the polls and you try to figure out, what's the strategic thing to do, which is nuts. You should be able to exercise your values. If we can't inject our values into our elections, what hope do we ever have of guiding our democracy? Our democracy needs a moral compass. It needs the compass of our values, and ranked choice voting unleashes that.
I agree with your enthusiasm and the basis of what you're saying. I think what I'm envisioning, though, and it's probably too Star Trek for right now, but I'm envisioning the greatest minds getting together, regardless, I guess is the word, of party affiliation, and bringing their best to the table, much like I also advocate for us going back and talking to the First Nations and learning their traditions, because we lost so much. There are people in this country and the world that, in my opinion, have a depth of detail and knowledge to share, but I don't see a venue at the moment.
And here's the problem. I mean, you're absolutely right, and that should happen, and that should be able to drive our direction forward. But the problem is we have a power structure right now, which is extremely powerful, and it will stomp out resistance or a challenge to the stranglehold of the fossil fuel industry in Wall Street. It won't allow it to happen. There's no lack of knowledge and no lack of solutions. That stuff is on the table, but it is systematically destroyed. So you have to, what's needed at the table is broad-reaching strategy so that we can actually mobilize this change.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It'd be great to see that, as a component of this grand solutions conference.
I'd like to thank you for joining us, and I'd also like to extend an invitation. I know you're really busy right now with everything going on with, Green Party and what have you, but we'd love to have you back on Real Progressives. You can contact us anytime if you ever have, some free time in your schedule where you can do even a split screen or one of our podcasts. We have a new podcast that is Macro and Cheese, and people can listen to it anywhere, and doing errands or what have you, or driving.
Yeah.
And it's very popular, and we've had some fantastic people, just like you, on with us. So we're extending the invitation from Real Progressives, and thank you so much.
Thank you. I will follow up.
All right.
Okay, great.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you
It was really
very
great
much.
talking.
Yes, I
Yeah.
really appreciate you making the time. and
Well, I
coming
really
over
appreciate
here.
you guys being the real media.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does
Before
this wrap it up for you?
I just
Yeah,
want to
great.
remind people, Real Progressives is an active organization. We have over 250,000 followers on Facebook. We still need more volunteers. We need some donations as well, so we can continue to do this kind of interviews and the podcasts and all the other things that we're trying to do. So when you want to think about politics and you want to learn something, check out Real Progressives. Thank you.